You can guys clap if you want to. Yeah. Good morning, Life Bridge. How are you guys doing on this beautiful fall morning? Great. Well, I encourage you guys, if you guys are feeling a little bit chilly, to just scooch next to each other. It's not COVID safe, but it's the best way to be warm. So, whatever that means for you guys. So, hello. How are you guys doing? Good. Well, I'm doing good too. It's been a busy week, but one thing I wanted to say, I wanted to sell to you guys actually before I begin my message is, so Christopher Yuan coming for the Holy Sexuality Conference. You guys need to come to that, okay? Christopher Yuan was my professor at Moody. He taught a class at Moody for me when he was an adjunct. I think that was while he was pursuing his PhD work. And he's awesome. I've heard him speak many times. If you guys are curious about a biblical way to view sexuality, Christopher Yuan is going to give an incredible story from his own life. And his biblical perspective on this is so helpful. So I know we're opening up to other churches right now, but I encourage you, if you haven't signed up for that, please sign up now. In fact, if you're at home watching this, go on to LifeBridge.org and sign up right now because it is an awesome thing that I wouldn't want you guys to miss. So I've got vested interests. I love Christopher, but I do think he has such a helpful perspective on this topic. And it's so cool, I think, as a church that we're bringing him in because he's an incredible speaker. You will cry probably hearing his story, and you'll be moved, and you'll also leave feeling way more prepared to deal with some of the issues in our culture right now. So please sign up for that. I highly recommend it. So I just got back from vacation. We came back on Monday. So it's been a busy week for me. But and that's the reason why, by the way, that you guys don't have slides. So I'm sorry. I really just want you guys to focus closely on me this morning. I want to have your full attention because there's no other option. But it's been a busy week. But on vacation, I had the privilege of going out east a little bit, out east of Virginia, and it was beautiful. And I don't know about you guys, but we all have our own kind of favorite parts of the United States, right? For me, I've always been kind of a Northwest sort of guy. I love the Northwest. It's beautiful. I spent a year in Spokane, Washington. There was a Moody campus out there, and I spent a year going to that Moody campus, and I fell in love with the mountains and the scenery out there. And then I got to spend a summer interning in Bozeman, Montana with Tide Rogers, who is an old pastor here years ago. And so the West is very much where my heart is in terms of like the culture, the climate, landscape, and the scenery. I've always kind of undersold the East, but I'll say that I was pretty impressed driving through Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia. We live in a beautiful country. And sea to shining sea, JJ called the Appalachian Mountains the Pokey Mountains. I thought it was hilarious. But it was such a cool reminder, especially considering what we're going to be talking about today, of this incredible, vast creation that God's given us. And I thought a lot about the settlers in the United States because Virginia is very historical as a state. And there are a lot of historical towns in Virginia that we got to walk through. And it just kind of reminded me that we kind of take this civilization thing kind of for granted a lot. For most of human history, nature has been brutal to us. And it has really done a good job at killing humans really effectively. And I think it's incredible. And I think because we've developed such incredible civilization through technology and industry, that I think we forget to respect nature and just how powerful it is. But when you're driving across country, you're seeing all these mountains, and you're just looking into the mountains, and you just see dense forests. You're like, how could someone survive in that, right? Anyways, all that being said, today we're going to talk about Genesis chapter 1. We're in the In His Image sort of series, and today we're going to focus our attention on the mandate towards the end of Genesis chapter 1 of man to have dominion over the earth in which we live in. And my hope today is that as we begin to honestly just simply walk through some of this chapter, and as we begin to just pull out what are the clear teachings of this chapter, that we develop a good understanding of what our relationship to the environment is, right? Because I do believe that we have been entrusted with this beautiful, incredible thing, and that we kind of take for granted a lot. And I hope that you leave here feeling like you take nature more seriously and you value it a little bit more. So As we begin getting into that, let me pray, and then we'll dive into Scripture. Jesus, thank you for your goodness. Thanks for bringing us here. Thank you for this beautiful weather, Lord. I'm reminded at why I sometimes like Illinois with the fall weather. And I just want to thank you for allowing us to enjoy this beautiful world that you've given us. And I just want to pray that, God, as we dive into your word in Genesis 1, that you would help us to understand what our responsibility is toward this beautiful creation you've entrusted to us. Please bless us and please help us to, please open up our eyes to your word and what it teaches. Amen. All right, so we're going to be in Genesis chapter 1. So if you guys just flip there right now, you guys won't have to move too much in your Bible. We're going to be there for most of the time. So flip in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to pick up in verse 26, and we're just going to begin walking through the passage. So Genesis 1, starting in verse 26. All right. I like the page flippings. This is nice. You guys don't have the crutch of the screen since I have no slides. So there it is. All right, I'm going to begin to read in verse 26, so hopefully you're there. It's really close to the front of the Bible, just so you know. It says this, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." Now, this passage is relatively straightforward, I think. But if we slow down a little bit and walk through the passage kind of step by step, I think this passage contains some really important ideas, okay? The first one I want to address is the idea in verse 27. So we're going to jump to verse 27 right now. And it talks about, "For God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of this because Bob's going to really dive into this idea of male and female and how that's so important, how we image God. But suffice to say, the fundamental idea is that humanity doesn't represent God, doesn't image God in isolation. That we as humans are not meant to be alone. We're not meant to be an island. We are created for relationship. And when you talk about the image of God, it's always in the context of male and female together, okay? So I want to say that, all right? Now let's jump to verse 26. It says in verse 26, again, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock and over all the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." I want to... one of the guys who used to attend our church, his name's Chad Hardy. I call him Chad Pitt because if you know him, it makes sense. But he was a PhD student at TEDS for a while, and he taught some classes here at the church about going through the Old Testament. That was his area of expertise. And when he talks about this passage, this mandate, he refers to mankind as being the regents of God to the creation. The passage just read talks about dominion, and what that means is that we as humans, as humankind, have been given dominion over the earth and are in charge to reign over the earth as God's representatives, okay? So God is in heaven, and he's given us this beautiful earth to reign in. The earth belongs to him. All glory goes to him, but he's placed us here to reign and to rule over it, okay? And I think it's a really helpful way to conceptualize it. I think that's really true to what the passage teaches. That as humans, our responsibility is to rule and to reign as representatives of God to creation. Now, there's a slightly dirty word in this passage that we don't like very much, right? That word is the word dominion. We don't like dominion, that word, maybe because it refers to some voting systems used in this last election, maybe, I don't know. But I think more so, we don't like the word dominion because we associate it with things like dominate, right? And which probably makes you think of Tuesday night basketball and what I do to everyone that comes to Tuesday night basketball, because I dominate and people don't like that very much. But more likely, I think, when we think about the word dominion or dominate, we think about this idea of a powerful person ruling and oppressing a weaker person, right? We have this negative connotation to the word that I don't think we need to have. I was talking to someone this week because I was processing this passage with someone, and they mentioned that it's kind of like the word submission, right? Submission's kind of got a dirty word. It's kind of dirty. We have this association with submission being like associated with oppression, right? Well, it actually isn't. Submission's a beautiful thing, and it's just a function that you play, and that's okay. And we all know what submission means because we all submit to people every single day, right? Dominion doesn't have to have a bad connotation. The Hebrew word for dominion is the word radah, and it simply means to rule and to reign. It gives no positive or negative to that, just simply that our job as representatives of God to creation is to rule and to reign over the earth. And here's the thing. We also don't always like the word rule or reign. We don't always like that word either. And that's usually because when we think about the word to rule or to reign, we think about a human ruling over another human and placing themselves above them as if they're of more value, right? But it's not necessarily the way the word is used here. And actually, the idea of ruling and reigning does imply that we are actually higher than everything else in creation. And that's because we are. God has given humans a special status among all of creation. Humans are the crown jewel of his creation. Humans are the only thing in the whole creation that are made in God's image. And it's because of that that we are fit to rule and to reign over the earth that we live in, right? Humans are immortal. You might not realize this all the time, but every single person you see next to you is an eternal, immortal being that's going to live forever, right? Even our bodies that we know are going to die someday are going to be resurrected imperishable, right? This isn't true of anything else. No other thing is immortal the way that we are, right? And the reason why is because we're made in God's image. So we might not like these words, dominion or rule or reign, but the reality is it sets humans apart from every other thing in the world. It sets us apart from the animals and the apes. Apes are not going to rule and reign over the earth. That is not their mandate. They are something different, right? So that's really important, okay? Dominion isn't bad. We have the right to have dominion because we are the crown jewel of God's creation, and God's entrusted that dominion to us. Does that make sense? It's pretty straightforward. Let's keep going on in the rest of the passage, verse 28 through 30. It says this, and this kind of flushes out more of what this dominion sort of looks like. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the field, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. In this passage, God is giving mankind two separate charges. The first charge is this. God is calling mankind to populate and foster human life all over the earth. We know this because the words fruitful, multiply, and fill in this context all seem to be in reference to this idea of propagating and fostering human life on the earth. The second part of God's charge is affirming what was already said in verse 26, and that is this. In summary, we are mandated to bring nature under humanity's control. The words subdue and dominion used together in the context seem to carry this idea of bringing nature under our control. And these two charges actually work in tandem together. We exercise our dominion as we subdue, and we subdue the earth through propagating and fostering human life on the earth, filling with more humans and expounding our dominion to every corner of the earth. And to be honest, if you're reading the passage, this actually seems to be the more straightforward way to read it. And in general, a good principle for Bible interpretation, if there is a straightforward way of interpreting a passage, it's usually the right way to interpret it, okay? It's not helpful all the time to try to dig too deep into things because sometimes it's as plain as day what it's saying. I think that's the case here. The primary function of humanity in relation to the world in Genesis 1 is to populate and foster human life and bring the earth under humanity's control. This glorifies God because we are the crown jewel of his creation. And as we read in verses 29 and 30, the environment, the plants, the animals, they have been given to us for us to have dominion and also to enjoy. They're a gift to us. It says even given in there, right? Which is really cool. And we all kind of understand sort of how this works. I'm going to use an analogy. I kind of own a house. I say kind of because the bank actually owns it, but whatever. Well, just for the sake of argument, I own a house. And in that house, I have rooms in the house. Now, I have kids, beautiful little boys that are made in my image, right? Because they've been begotten of my wife and I. And I want them to have a space where they can have dominion and rule and reign. I call that their room, right? And in that room, I give them toys. I give them a bed to sleep in. I give them clothes to wear. Laura kind of finds the clothes actually for them to wear. And as they get older, I'll want them to enjoy that room. I'll give them the license maybe to paint the room whatever color they want to and to decorate the walls. But their room is a place that I own, right? But I've given to them so they can enjoy and have dominion over, right? Now, with this room, I do expect a little bit of something in return. I don't really want them putting holes in the walls, right? That wouldn't be the best. I don't really want them breaking every single one of their toys because that's not really being a good steward of the toys I've given them, right? But I do want them to enjoy it, and I want them to reign there, and I want them to rule there, kind of, as long as it's not, JJ ruling over his younger brother. But we get this, right? It glorifies God to see the crown jewel of his creation delighting in the things that he's given them, right? And so it really does delight the heart of God to see us delight in, enjoy, and use this creation so that we can prosper and have dominion. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Now, that's really simple. Honestly, I could just end the sermon there and just be done and let you guys go home, which I'm sure a lot of you guys would appreciate. But I think that's kind of the primary idea of this passage. But I think what's really important is for us to take that idea and begin to apply that idea to the 21st century. Before I do that, I do want to address an anticipated question that I assume some of you guys are thinking. How has the fall affected this mandate that God's given us, right? Genesis 1 comes before Genesis 3, and I think it's chronological in a sense. So how does the fall affect this mandate we're given to populate, foster life, but also to reign and have dominion over the earth? And that's a great question if you guys are thinking it, so good job. But to answer that question, I think it's affected it in 4 fundamental ways. The first way the fall's affected this mandate is this. From the very beginning of post-sin in Genesis 3, we see a rift in the marriage relationship immediately, right? We see mankind, man and woman covering themselves because they're ashamed and hiding themselves from each other and hiding from God. And there is a curse that woman's desire will be for their husband and the husband will rule over them. And this very thing, the core of the way in which we image God, this male-female relationship, there's been a rift in there, right? In which we don't do that. That's broken in some profound way, right? And that it really does affect our ability to do what we're called to do as Christians and to do what we're called to do by God as his representatives, right? The second way that that the fall has affected this mandate is childbearing. Childbearing, at least until about 40, 50 years ago, is rife with pain and suffering, and still is. I think we take for granted a little bit in modern times how safe childbearing is, right? If you look back historically, it was not uncommon at all for kids to be lost in pregnancy and for the mom to be very affected and sometimes die as a result of pregnancy. Modern medicine and technology has really made having kids a whole lot safer. But even so, I've gotten to witness a few pregnancies myself, and it is a very intense process. It's a very painful process, right? And that's a result of sin, right? I think that the original intent for creation was that it was supposed to be easy for life to be brought forth in the world, right? But one of the specific curses in Genesis 3 was at the childbearing level, right? I think that does affect our ability to do this because there's some people that can't have kids. There's some people that are barren. There's some people that are sterile, and it's really hard for them because as human beings, we find a lot of meaning in this process of bringing forth life because it really is a beautiful and wonderful thing. And I think that if you do have a family and kids, I think you should be incredibly grateful for that because that is a profound gift that God's given you. But that's not how it is for everybody. And that's incredibly sad. And it does hinder us as humans' ability to fulfill this mandate in a profound way. The third way in which the fall has affected this is is that sin has really affected our ability to rule and to reign rightly as God's representatives, right? You don't have to look very hard to find oppressive rulers through history, right? They rise up all the time. There's this thing inside of us that hates God and wants to reign as kings ourselves instead of reigning as his representatives. And that really has, in a lot of ways, destroyed a ton of human life over the years, right? And not only that, but it's really done incredible damage to the planet too, in a lot of ways. We as humans are broken. And we are unable to function as rulers the way we're intended to, right? And that's sad. That's worth grieving about. And the final thing is that creation is under a curse too because of the fall, right? Where creation doesn't yield its fruit the way that it used to pre-fall. And also, the world is brutal and really does a good job of killing humans a lot of times through natural disasters, through starvation, through famine, right? All these things have been affected by the fall. But the important point is that just because these things have been affected, this mandate has been affected by the fall, does not mean the mandate no longer stands. Psalm 8, 6-8 says this. It affirms the creation mandate in Genesis 1. Here's what it says. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands, and you have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. Here we see, thousands of years later, the psalmist affirming the creation mandate, saying this is still legitimate, right? And I think the point is that even though we're broken, even though our ability to reign and to rule and to populate and multiply on the earth is broken, that we still have this responsibility to fulfill this mandate, that has not changed, that it's harder and it's a little messier than it was intended to be, but that mandate still remains. Does that make sense? That's super important. Now, why is all this relevant? So we have this mandate of creation, but now we're in 2021, and what relevance does this mandate have for us now? And I think this mandate, although it's kind of, it doesn't seem very profound, actually has really profound implications for how we view things going in the world right now. The first aspect I want to talk about is how Christians should view the environment. I'm going there. In our discussions these days, there is a lot of discussion about how humanity has treated the environment poorly. The question that we need to consider in light of our creation mandate to populate, foster life, and bring nature under our control is how do we view the environment in 2021? And here's what I think in short. In short, we need to view the environment as our responsibility to take care of, right? With the qualification that we should not take care of the environment at the expense of human life or human prosperity. We should always strive to view the created world the way that God does, which means that it's valuable, incredibly valuable, but not most valuable. Let's go back to the room analogy. I like this analogy because it's my life right now. I want my boys to take good care of their toys. We actually had a situation yesterday when we discovered a really nice toy in just a pool of water at our house. But I want my kids to take care of the toys that I have bought for them, right? They're for them to enjoy. Of course, I want them to enjoy them. And I want them to respect them. I don't want them to put a nice toy into a pool of water because that destroys the toy, and that's not good, right? Because then you're not appreciating the effort and the sweat that I went through to buy you that toy. But at the same time, I'm not going to put them in the room, put all their toys away, and forbid them from playing with any of their toys because I want to keep their toys safe, right? No. The toys I give my kids are meant for their enjoyment, right? They might not always treat them well. They might throw them in a pool of water, maybe. But I want them to enjoy them. I want them to play with them. I want them to be creative. I want them to create things. I want them to thrive in this room that I've given them, in the house. I want them to love that place. And I want them to treat it with respect, right? And I think that's actually a pretty good analogy for how our posture should be towards the environment. We should love this world that God's created for us. We should value it. We should strive to take care of this environment in such a way that our grandchildren can benefit from it too years later, right? We should strive to do that. But it doesn't mean we don't ever play with it or touch it or mess around with it. Does that make sense? Christians, God has given us this beautiful world. And I think we need to learn how to treat it with respect. I think we should learn how to grow things. And I think we should learn how to care for animals. Because as we learn more about these things, these created things, we learn to value them more. If recycling is good for the environment, then we should try to recycle. We should learn not to waste food. And I think it's good to learn how to live simple lives. All these things are good ways to take practical steps at being more environmentally conscious. And I think Christians all should be conscious of trying to take good steps to care for this earth that God's given us. However, there is a line to environmentalism. And that line is we shouldn't sacrifice humans at the altar of environmentalism. Here's what I mean. If our steps at caring for the environment means that we are creating suffering for humans, then caring for the environment is no longer worth the cost. Getting more practical and dipping my toe into the political ramifications of this. In our culture, there's a lot of talk in the mainstream about the environments and collective things we can do to better care for the environment. And these talks are really good if done in good faith, I think. They can be really good talks. What I want to say, though, regarding this political conversation is that I think we need to think carefully about the human costs of environmental initiatives. I think we need to have honest public debate about the human costs and the effectiveness of environmental initiatives and move politically in a direction where we are striving to minimize the human costs while at the same time trying to be better stewards of the environment that we've been entrusted with. If environmental initiatives generate greater human suffering than they would stave off, I believe that the Christians should be against them. And the reason why is because I believe that we value human life above all other life. Another landmine I'd really like to step in right now with regards to the Christian mandate is the landmine of, maybe it's not controversial, probably not in this room, but I think culturally it might be, is this overpopulation conversation. There are many people, believe it or not, that believe that there's a looming crisis coming to our world. And that crisis, and this concern has been around for 50, 60 years, ever since kind of post-World War II. There's been this fear that we're going to get so many people living on the earth that eventually there's going to be mass famine, mass starvation, and we're actually going to destroy everything because the world's going to be overpopulated, and we're just going to consume, and we're just going to rid the whole world of all its resources. And here's the thing. In a certain way, that kind of makes sense. Let me show you an analogy and how that makes sense. Imagine I've got this table in front of me right here, right? And there are 10 cookies on the table. This is the way that the eugenicists would think. I have one other person next to me, right? And there are 10 cookies. What that means is we each get 5 cookies. Hey, I like cookies. You guys like cookies? 5 cookies? That sounds great, right? But what if we had 15 people right here and 10 cookies to choose from, right? Well, then there's a problem because there are going to be people that don't get cookies. And what's going to turn into is it's going to turn into a battle among the people to get as many cookies as you possibly can, knowing there are going to be some that are left behind that are going to starve from a lack of cookies. Does that make sense? So this argument sort of makes sense, right, in a limited sort of way. It makes sense if you believe that there are limited resources, and there's only a finite number of resources the world contains, right? And once we run out of those, we're all done. And there's no way for those resources to multiply or generate more. What I'm really thankful for is that that's just not the way that God's created the world. What's really cool about food is that when you grow a plant, it has seeds in them, right? Those seeds can grow more plants, right? Animals have kids. So as you eat this delicious burger, right, they had to kill a cow for it. Well, there's probably other cows that cow had, right? So the number is not finite. And also, too, God has created humans so incredibly that we're able to innovate and figure out incredible creative ways through technology to feed everybody, right? And to use the things that God's given us in his world to create prosperity for as many people as possible. There's a book that I read a couple years ago. It's called Enlightenment Now. It's by a guy named Steven Pinker. I'm not going to recommend the book because he is not a Christian and does not like Christianity very much at all. And that comes out a little bit in his book. But the book makes a really interesting stance from a secular perspective. His argument, this is written in about 2017, so the stats are about up to 2017. And his argument in this book is that although we hear all over that things are just getting worse and worse and worse for everybody all the time, that if you honestly look statistically, things are actually better as of 2017 than they ever have been before on almost every single possible metric, whether it's prosperity, whether it's equality, whether it's like starvation, that even though now, or as of 2017, we have 7-point-something billion people on the earth, and in 80 years ago, we had like 1 billion people on the earth, right? That somehow there's less poverty now, and there's less hunger now than there was like 50, 60 years ago, right? Now that seems to throw a wrench in this whole overpopulation argument, that somehow we're going to populate the earth and we're not going to feed everybody, right? Somehow it seems like that as culture progresses, they're able to find really creative ways to grow food and to make food and to feed a lot of people, right? I think there are more people that are fat now, that are overweight now, that are malnourished, right? And that's incredible from a historical perspective. Like that's like never happened before, right? We are living in a culture of abundance now in a lot of places. And even in really remote parts of Africa, the starvation rate is way less than it was 50, 60, 100 years ago, right? So from a secular perspective even, there's an argument to be made that maybe we're not really running out of resources at the pace that we think we are. Maybe these, what we think are finite resources aren't as finite as we once thought, right? There are people in the 60s that thought within 10 years, the world would be destroyed because of overall population. And they were wrong about that, really wrong. But here's why it's important. This argument for overpopulation does one thing that's fundamentally wrong. It undervalues human life. It makes it seem like human life isn't that important, that we should be able to control it, that when babies are born, that actually is a cancer to the world instead of a blessing to the world. This is 100% an anti-Christian worldview, right? One, I don't think it's valid from a secular perspective either, but two, it's absolutely invalid from a Christian perspective. Every single time a life is created, anywhere in the world, I think it rejoices the heart of God. And every single time life is diminished or unable to see day, I think it grieves God's heart. I think we don't have to worry about overpopulation because ultimately God has us in his hands and he'll take care of us. Ultimately, I believe there's nothing we can do to destroy humans outside of God's plan, right? So as Christians, we need to reject this idea that somehow we are going to make a world where, people are devalued because we need to take care of the environment above them. And that's just garbage from a Christian perspective. Does that make sense? Okay. The last thing I want to say with regards to this is there's some people that really struggle with this Genesis 1 mandate because they're unable to bring forth life themselves. That's sad to me because life really is a beautiful thing. But for those of you that might not be in a position where you're able to bring forth life into the world yourself, I will say that you still are able to foster human life on this earth. There are so many ways, you guys, if you guys are creative about it, that you can work towards fostering human life. You can adopt kids, which our church has just been awesome with that, by the way. One of the things I love about our church is we have so many of you guys that have adopted kids and brought kids that wouldn't have a family into your own home and raised them as your own. There's nothing more beautiful to me than adoption because that's exactly what God's done for us, right? We've been adopted as his sons and daughters. So that's incredible. That's one thing. Also, you could use whatever gifts and talents you have to encourage people and to do things that foster human flourishing on this earth. Just because you're unable to have kids does not mean that you are unable to participate in this creation mandate, right? You are able to. God's giving you gifts, and he wants you to use those fundamentally to bring forth life and hope into the world. And every single one of us can do that. And for me, that's really hopeful. There are a couple things I want to say in conclusion. The first thing is what I think is the clearest possible message of Genesis 1, and that's that life is always valuable. We should fight for life, advocate for life, and do whatever we can to advance life. Every human being is precious in God's sight, and we need to view every human being, even our enemies, that same way. The second thing I want to say is this, that Christians should care about being the best stewards we possibly can of the world that we've been entrusted with. We have a great responsibility of reigning over the creation as God's representatives. We should take that responsibility seriously and do whatever we can in our own life to rule and reign the way God would on this earth. And the last thing I want to say is we need to control nature and not let nature control us. Let me explain what I mean by that. One of my favorite books I've ever read is a book by C.S. Lewis called The Abolition of Man. Now, I tend to be more of a philosophical thinker, so those kind of books just really resonate with me. Abolition means the end. So C.S. Lewis writes this book about how will mankind end? What will be its end? And essentially what he believes will be the end of mankind is, first, we disregard the universal moral law that governs the universe, which is God. We'll disregard him, right? In his stead, powerful people will be able to determine what's right and wrong themselves, and those laws will be determined by their fleshly nature, right? They'll drive those passions, right? And his point is that the end of mankind will be that we actually become enslaved to our fleshly natures and to nature itself, the very thing that we're called to have dominion over. C.S. Lewis predicted a great reversal, right? Instead of us reigning and ruling over creation, we allow the creation to reign and rule over us, right? And this is a good warning for us. It is really tempting. It's always been tempting since Genesis 3 to not be content with our role as God's representatives because we kind of want to be God. And the danger here is that when we become God, we are not fit for that responsibility. And we become vulnerable to our own fleshly nature. As Christians, we need to realize that it is not our job to govern ourselves. At the end of the day, that we need to allow God and his Spirit and his Word govern our thoughts and our actions. Because if we don't do that, I believe, like C.S. Lewis predicts, that at an individual level, you can become enslaved to your fleshly nature. Something that I feel like through the power of the Holy Spirit, we're supposed to have dominion over as well. We need to realize that this creation mandate, that what's said in Genesis 1 really does reign true now. It really should inform the way we think about the world and about human life and about our responsibility towards it. And it should also always be a warning to not get things twisted, right? We are not God's, we are his representatives, and we need to always make sure that order is correct. Otherwise, we run into some dangerous, dangerous places. I'm going to pray. Jesus, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for this really powerful mandate for creation. I want to pray that, God, you help us to learn to think theologically about things happening in the world. I want to thank you that your word stands through time. And the things that are taught in your word stand over the generations and generations and generations and will always be true and always be the same. I want to pray that you give us wisdom to use the Holy Spirit and the thing that you've given us and to be able to process the world and the things going on in the world through a Christian lens. I love you, Jesus. Help us to be good representatives of you to the creation and give us the power to bring forth life wherever we go and wherever we touch. Amen.